Hi guys, welcome back. This is Matt Chat 106, featuring part 2 of my interview with Sensible Software founder Jon Hare. Now if you haven't seen part 1, you should go back and watch that first. What we'll do here is pick right up with Jon talking about the Apple platforms and the casual game development scene, a little bit more about the endowmenting of gamers and much, much more, including the early days of Sensible Software. So we've got a lot to cover, so without further ado, here is Jon Hare.
So we've been challenged basically to relearn in this market. You know, if I observe what's happened with Speedball, which is a great version of Speedball, really is the best since the Amiga. It's probably too complicated for a lot of iPhone gamers. You know, I mean, Speedball had really 3 target markets. First was guys who knew the original, who have been a very easy sell, I might add. Predominantly in Europe, because it's a predominantly European title. The second raft was people in the States who may be into sports games, like that kind of game, but just didn't know what Speedball was. Those guys have been pretty hard for us to reach, which is I still got to work out the way to do it, because I'm sure a lot of guys in the States would love Speedball if they can just find it. I don't have any doubt that sophisticated gamers will like it there. And then you've just got the guys who are totally new to it. And again, I think that some kids who've played console games and stuff will like Speedball, but some of your newer iPhone crowd who like games like Tiny Wings, I doubt they're ever going to like it. I mean, and I also doubt, you know, it's unlikely it's going to appeal to women. It's a sports game. It's a brutal sports game. It's got very little that would appeal to women, which are half our market on the iPhone. So, you know, Word Explorer, which I mentioned earlier, is very much the opposite. It's very much almost more tailored to women than it is to guys. So I think that in terms of action gaming for the iPhone, I don't think you can be that demanding of people in terms of their reflexes and their hand-eye coordination. I think something like Angry Birds, which is a brilliant game in my opinion, works well because it's quite simple. The action is very simple. It's one at a time. You've got plenty of time. It's not that difficult. So I think that not being over demanding on people is becoming quite important in these games. If you notice, all the successful games, they either give you very limited things you can do at once, or they give you all the time in the world to consider simple actions. You know, I mean, Cut the Rope is actually quite demanding for one of these games. It's probably the most demanding of these games. You've got the most different actions to do, and they're relatively quickly one after the other, which is great. It's been an exception. Again, it's another great game on these platforms, and that's really nailed it. Cut the Rope and Angry Birds, I've got a lot of respect for. Tiny Wings is just like, hopefully, the bottom of the pile of the successful games. Sorry, Mr. Tiny Wings. It's only like a young Russian guy, and it's been great for him, but really, it's like X Factor gaming to me. You know. That's exactly how I view it.
You know, it seems like the iOS is a bit of a paradox for a lot of designers, right? It seems like people who have iPhones and iPads like to think of themselves as really intelligent and sophisticated people, but you're not really seeing that in many of the popular games for the system, right?
I think the problem is that, you know, those of us who have been playing games for 25, 30 years plus, or 20 years plus, or even 15 years plus, you know, we've developed a very sophisticated sense and internal back catalogue of game concepts, game ideas, the way things work. We know what appeals to us, what doesn't. And a lot of people are encountering games for the first time on an iPhone, or maybe through Facebook or something like that. And that is just happening now. So I think that we have to understand where those people are. So I think we've just got to adapt, you know, and we've got to understand there's different markets. On the one hand, you've got, at the moment, going on consecutively, massive demand of very visually sophisticated stuff on consoles. Really at the top end, you know. I mean, I don't know if you saw the latest God of War game. Have you seen that? I mean, the art is just absolutely stunning. It's, you know, it's out of this world. To me, it's one of the best games I've ever seen artistically, and the benchmark is so high to reach that. The gameplay itself is fairly simplistic. Again, it's a bit like a... It reminded me in some ways of Call of Duty. It's just kind of a chase. It's a race game. It's kind of mindless action, but it looks nice. So you ride with it, basically, you know. And then you've got really sophisticated games. Like World of Warcraft is a massively sophisticated game. You think about it, how mature that game is in gaming terms. Brilliantly executed. Probably the best executed game we've seen in the last 20 years, I think. Really brutally addictive. And that's because the achievement settings of the game are so well tuned. There's always, it's like, I know not many guys in the States watch cricket, but if you ever watch cricket and you get into it, it goes on for 5 days, okay? And basically you sit there and you're waiting for one guy to get 50 runs and then for someone else to get a wicket and so many overs to pass and this record to be broken. And basically every 10 minutes something important's going to happen. So you sit back on your couch and just watch more and more and more. If you're into it. A lot of people hate it and turn off. And it's the same with World of Warcraft. There's always something dangling in front of your nose to keep you up for the next half an hour. You know, it's a perfectly paced, never-ending game. But you know that is so far beyond what casual users on an iPhone want. It's so far beyond it. You know, even there's really interesting observations kicking around at the moment because we've got. I mean, I'm working with this team, Vivid Games in Poland. We work very closely on a lot of stuff. Some of them are my games, some of them are their games, some of them are things like Speedball, which is a bitmap game, which came from Mike, who's a mate of mine who runs bitmaps. So some of them from all different kind of areas, these ideas are coming in. And we can support about 9 different platforms with these guys, which covers all the main mobile platforms and then the Sony platforms and PC and Mac and all these, you know, Flash games, all kinds of different things, PSP as well, and DS. But what's interesting is, if you've got a game idea, like if we have Word Explorer, or we had Speedball, the way you monetize those games, the way you actually make money is different slightly for every platform. Some of them, they'll only really work if you sell them for free, which isn't really selling them, it's giving them away. So you need the internal currency. Some of them, you can sell them at different price points. But then if you put them at some different price points and then you put the monetization as well, people moan that they're going to pay twice. But we really don't have to redesign the game again and again and again, you understand? We just need to tweak the money a little bit. And then you've got socialization differences. Facebook games, people love to share and gift things to each other. You know, here's this thing I've made and I'm going to gift it to you. An interesting observation on iPhone, that doesn't really work. You know, people don't really do gifting in iPhone. It's more about, if anything, comparative scoring. So I scored this much on this level, now see if you can beat me. So what we have to do is bring a game to 85%, 90% complete, and then finish it off for our target platform. But then when we go to the other platforms, work out how we need to tweak that, you know. And you have to look at things like, do we go through Game Center? Well, you can't do Game Center apart from on iPhone. Do you use OpenFaint? Do you use OpenFaint and Game Center? You know, do you use Score Loop? Do you use some other new thing at the moment? And so it's not ideal. It's fragmented. It's irritating as hell. But there are opportunities. And the opportunities have not been there for so many years. The console platforms and the early mobile platforms have been so license heavy. You know, I mean, it's easy for me to keep on harping back to the good old days. But the reason that the Amiga was the good old days was that this stuff wasn't an issue. You could make original games. People just, publishers wanted them, they bought them, the public liked them, everyone was happy. Suddenly, it just slowed to a grinding halt. And I know it's not just games. I know I've heard Bruce Willis about 5 or 6 years ago moaning about the amount of scripts he was getting through, which is the same bloody film again and again and again. And, you know, it's very familiar. Yeah, it's a very familiar story. He just wasn't interested in the scripts he was getting through. So, you know, we see it with everything. So we know it's not just games, but it is great that we've got this opportunity. And I really hope that the public embraces a different spirit of buying games. You know, we've there's a generation a little younger than me, which is kind of fallen hook, line and sinker for consumerism. And then I see with my kids, particularly my youngest daughter, who's 16, I see her generation is slightly different and not quite so sold on consumerism, because they've had it since they were 0, basically. And so I think there will be some kind of cynicism coming through, especially as people start to make less money, their pensions run out, blah, 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 blah. I think a new energy will come through. I think the complacency of shopping mall culture and the actual economic abyss it's going to drop us into eventually should change the mentality. It might take 15 years from now.
Jesus Christ. They're maniacs.
But, you know, great creativity in all the different media down back through the centuries takes social change to stimulate some new energy, basically. And from the energy you get creative output, which is expressed depending upon the cultural feeling and the available media at the time. So that's kind of what we've not really had games around in a time where expression, say in the way you look at Bob Dylan and what he did with music back in the 60s, software as a medium hasn't really been around where that need for expression has been strong. But in 10 or 15 years' time, it could be totally different. We could find radically different forms of expression happening in software, some of which are, you know, games. If you see games as entertainment software, you know, there's a lot of different ways that we could be making product which stimulates people, not just by playing, but by playing and thinking, that combination of doing different things. So I hope that we open the door on totally different uses of software for entertainment purposes than just the narrow idea of you shoot someone or you go and do an RPG or you have a platform gamer. You know, it's so narrow and limited, and I'm sick of hearing people say that there's no new game ideas. There are thousands. You know, I've got 11 good ideas sitting in my drawer. It's just no one's wanted to put money into them. That's all. And of course, the longer what you saw in the 80s and the 90s was when you innovate, it encourages other people to innovate on top of your innovation. So you get this rapid growth of expansion of ideas. And so we just got to keep on encouraging that. You know, obviously you don't want to lose money. You know, not losing money is the first rule of business to me. So you need the smaller platforms to make it happen on, because the bigger platforms, you can never be risk-free. And you need to be risk-free to be expressive. You know, if you've got an artist and he's worried about the fact that he hasn't got a house and he's got no food and his wife's about to walk out on him, he's not going to make his best art. You know, it might inspire his best tragic art 2 years later when he's in the gutter. But during that time of his life falling apart is not when you're going to make your best art. It's when you're going to be watching the bottom line, doing the work for hire again instead of doing your thing. That's the reality of what happens, you know. And I think that too many guys in our industry see games as purely technical or purely business or purely license driven, and forget the creative artistic side, which isn't just about pictures. It's about ideas. It's about everything. It's about good direction, good sound, you know, good teams of people fusing together to make great products. And generally, in that kind of creative team, you can't get more than 5 or 6 people before it becomes about politics rather than about dynamics, you know?
What you're talking about now was the genesis of sensible software, right? The sort of the philosophy behind it.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, when we sent Sensible up, I mean, me and Chris were at school together. We first met on a tube train when we were going to see Rush. You know, the Canadian band Rush. We were going to a Rush gig. Now, we didn't know each other, but we were both with friends from school, and all 4 of us went to the same school, and so our friends knew each other, so we got talking. This is how we met. So Chris and I started off in a band. We played in the band together for 3 or 4 years before we even made a single game. And so our mentality was that band mentality. You know, you make stuff together, you make it good, and you try and sell it. And we were doing games and music for a while in tandem. For about 5 or 6 years, actually, we were doing both. And eventually the games started to make more money, so we focused on those more. And then we added Martin Galway, who was a great games musician, who, you know, did Whizball, Parallax for us, and then all the other classic Ocean tunes on the Commodore 64. And then we signed Chris Chapman, who I saw today, actually, because we're talking about something at the moment. Chris Chapman, who was a programmer for Megalomania and Sensible Soccer, and Stuart Cambridge, who I also saw today, who's the artist on Cannon Fodder. Julian Jameson, who is now living in Canada, who was a programmer for Cannon Fodder. And we had Dave Korn, who's a kind of maverick kind of character, who did some bits on Sensible Soccer and did the 3D tennis for us. And there's about 6 of us. And Richard Joseph doing sound as well. And it's like a little team. It's like a little band. That's what it felt like. That's what, if you see the Cannon Fodder video, is what that expresses. You know, that was what we were. We were a 6-7 man team. Mike Hammond, who did all our stats for the Sensible Soccer, all the football data and stuff, he came in occasionally, and our accountant even came in sometimes. And you know, we were a bunch of guys making something happen together. You know, anyone who's been involved in that kind of process, it's a fantastic process. You know, that could happen anywhere, whether you're writing a magazine or whatever you're putting together. It's a great thing to happen. It's got a lot of good energy when you've got good products coming out. And it only really changed when we went up to, well, in 1995, we signed a 3-product deal with Warner, and we needed more employees, basically, because we had signed up three 3D games, and we'd become the masters of making 2D games, basically. I would say we were the best Commodore 64 team at the end of the Commodore 64, and we were the best Amiga team in Europe at the end of both those machines. And so we moved to 3D extremely late, and we needed all these extra people, and the dynamic changed. You went from, like, from my perspective, from being one of the leaders of a band to, like, being the conductor in an orchestra. You know, it was a little bit out of your depth. You got the guys who weren't so good, but you didn't quite suss them out till too late because they could hide in the mass of the team, you know. And we hadn't really had anyone like that. You know, all the guys that worked with us before that point were brilliant. And the dynamic, it just changed. It wasn't so hands-on, wasn't so direct, wasn't so intense, you know. And you got the odd guy who didn't pull his weight, so everyone else is thinking, well, why should I work late when he's not working late, you know? And beforehand, people would just come and work late because it was great. We're having a lot of fun, making great products and making a lot of money, you know. It was a lot of fun. And we tried to keep the spirit of what we were doing alive, but it required a lot of focus on your work and a lot of skill, as well as the fun. I mean, we at one time we experimented with putting beer in our drinks machine at work. That was a mistake. That lasted a few months. But you know, we had.
Is that around the time of Twister, Mother of Charlotte?
No, that was around the time of Cannon Fodder 2, I think. We tried the beer. We had a little games room downstairs. We had a pool table, and you know, I guess it's quite common now in companies. It wasn't so common then. We had a little office, and we had a little room downstairs. And we had like a television, a pool table, some consoles, a fruit machine, and in fact, one of the traditions at Sensible, which stems back to using the Amstrad for a cricket bat in our office when we had an office and just me and Chris in a big office. The Amstrad was the bat, and a roll of tape was the ball. And if a key fell off the Amstrad, you scored a 4, which was good fun. And there was a box for a wicket. We had a history of equipment breaking as part of the ritual of Sensible. So we did a photo shoot for Megalomania, and we had a bunch of old monitors and computers and stuff. And actually, it was the first commercial photo shoot we'd ever set up ourselves to do with inviting a magazine. And basically in it, we just smashed all the computers up, like threw rocks at the screens and stuff. It was so much fun because we worked next to this old station yard. So it had this like broken space where you could do this stuff. And Chris Chapman used to work extremely hard. He was a brilliant programmer. And we used to allow him to get his frustration out on the old Konix joysticks. You know, there's round Konix, red and black ones. The broken ones, we used to play conkers with them. You know, where you kind of like throw the thing to smash it. So that was another thing we did. And the very worst thing we did, we had this fruit machine which stopped working. And someone had brought in some dumbbells to do some weights to keep himself fit whilst they were at work. So there was this big bar kicking around in the room and this fruit machine. And someone decided to turn the bar on the fruit machine. And we all took it in turns to smash this fruit machine with this great big weight bar. Until it was like one of those, those competitions where they smash up a piano to stick it through a hole this size. It was like that. It was a lot of fun. And then after that, we just hoovered up, put it in a bin bag, and there's a kind of spirit in the office. We were working hard, we were having fun. Everyone was working very late a lot of the time. It was the place had its own atmosphere.
Sounds like some good advice for anyone wanting to work for you would be to find a hard hat, right?
I don't know, but basically the hardest thing to do working for me is getting used to being told to do something again because it's not good enough. I'm quite a perfectionist, and I have more stamina for waiting until it's right than most people I know. I mean, Mike Montgomery, the guy who runs a Bitmaps, is even more so like that than me. Mike, I've seen him go 3 days without sleep before whilst he's working. I can do just nearly 2. But yeah, it just becomes a way of life. We just got used to it. It's fun.
Well, that's all for this week's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Should be back next week with the 3rd installment of my interview with Mr. Jon Hare. Got a lot of great stuff to cover, including the stories behind your favorite Sensible Software games. Finally! Anyway, stay tuned. I know you're going to enjoy that. Also, I want to give you a heads up. In a couple weeks, I will be traveling to Bogota, Colombia to attend and speak at the Campus Party 2011. Now, a fan of the show named David Arcilla was kind enough to set all this up for me, so thanks very much, David. Now, if you don't know anything about this campus party, it looks fantastic. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. You can see there'll be tons of gaming, lots and lots of sessions and panels, game design stuff. Just looks like an incredible experience. Plus, it's my first time ever to be out of the United States. Got my passport and everything, so really looking forward to that. And if you're anywhere near Columbia in a couple weeks, love to meet you, love to see you there at the campus party. I also have a toast this week, and the toast is from Christopher Spencer. And Christopher wanted me to find a blueberry ale, a blueberry stout. I guess he's concerned about my antioxidants. And I was able to find this from the Dark Horse Brewing Company in Marshall, Michigan. This is the Trace Blueberry Stout. So let's give the blueberry stout a try here. I took the liberty of filling up the old drinking horn. Wow, you know what? Let me try this again. You know, I can honestly say I've never tasted anything like this before. Kind of like coffee, maybe like if you took coffee and added a cherry flavored Dr. Pepper to it. You know, that's sort of what it tastes like. I don't know if that makes it sound too good. Actually, it is quite tasty, and I am sure I will enjoy finishing this off after I'm done recording. Anyway, I have a quotation as always, this time from Bob Dylan, and it goes something like this. A man is a success if he gets up in the morning and gets to bed at night and does what he wants to in between. See you guys next week.
Mr. Dillon, I know you dislike labels, and probably rightly so, but for those of us who are well over 30, could you label yourself and perhaps tell us what your role is?
Well, sort of label myself as well under 30. And my role is to, to just stay here as long as I can.